Hey everybody, my name's Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now before we get into it, just the standard stuff first. If you really like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it and leave a 5-star rating if you're listening to it. And if you're watching it over on YouTube, be sure to scroll down and hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. And if you're curious as to when that happens, new episodes drop unless the world is ending. Usually every week at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursdays. Got it right. The reason why that didn't happen last week was because everything in my studio was fighting me for everything it had last week. And that resulted in me uploading everything and releasing everything at 7:30 instead of 7. I'm going to do my best to never let that happen again because that was wildly stressful. But it happened. And on that note, if you absolutely love what I'm doing here, you want more of it, you can go find more of it over on the show's site, which is bento-box.ghost.io. That site again is bento-box.ghost.io. There'll be a link to it wherever you want to find it in the description of this episode on YouTube, in the description of this episode on your podcast player of choice, and in the YouTube description, as well as in the podcast description. And while you're over there, if you are so inclined or want a different kind of experience with your standard anime tracker app, I have been working on an app. I want to say over 100 and some odd people currently testing it. I'm not saying out loud when I want to release it because that makes it real and also puts pressure on me, which I don't like doing, but for stuff like this, rather, for stuff like releasing stuff like that. But you can go join the beta, so you can have it right now if you are on an iOS device. It works on both iPad and iPhone. Of anything that runs iOS 26, it will run on that. So definitely go check that out. I'm pretty proud of it. I'm pretty sure it's feature complete at this point. I'm just working out the kinks and making sure everything stays in the right place and everything works perfectly and all that stuff. But definitely go check that out. I'm really proud of it. It is its own tab in the top navigation of the website. That website, one more time, is bento-box.ghost.io, and you can find that link anywhere you can find this episode. So definitely go check that stuff out. And on that note, we're going to jump into what we're talking about this week, and that's a little show from, actually, I have the exact season of this, which is wild, thanks to that specific app I've been working on. This is a show from the winter season of 1998, and if you're like, that's real old, it's also a very specific year, and we'll get to that when I'm talking about the show in question. And that show in question you might have heard of. It's called Outlaw Star. So I'm going to throw it over to I to give us a plot synopsis. So take it away, I.
Outlaw Star takes place in a future where humanity has expanded across space using advanced technology. The story follows Gene Starwind, a charming but reckless handyman living on the frontier world of Sentinel-3. Alongside his young partner Jim Hawking, Gene survives by taking whatever jobs he can find, usually dangerous ones that pay just enough to keep them flying under the radar. Their lives change when a routine protection job pulls them into a conflict involving pirates, assassins, and a mysterious bio-android girl named Melfina. During the chaos, Gene and Jim come into possession of an experimental spaceship called the Outlaw Star, one of the most advanced vessels ever created. Suddenly, they're no longer small-time operators. They're targets. As Gene assembles a crew that includes the fierce alien warrior Aisha Clan and the deadly assassin Suzuka, the group travels from planet to planet, taking bounty jobs and smuggling work while trying to stay ahead of powerful enemies. But the Outlaw Star itself holds a deeper secret. Melfina is the key to locating the galactic ley line, a legendary cosmic source said to grant ultimate knowledge or power. Multiple factions race to reach it first, forcing Gene and his crew into a galaxy-spanning conflict.
Now, with the plot synopsis out of the way, I want to talk about a little bit about the kind of landscape that show that Outlaw Star found itself in when it was coming out. Because 1998 is a very specific year in anime, as the shows I'm about to rattle off will prove. It was in the same company as things like Trigun, Cowboy Bebop, and one other show that's really interesting, Serial Experiments Lain. In fact, I think it was actually in the same, the winter season of 1998, both Outlaw Star and Serial Experiments Lain might have been on TV at the same time. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I got the sense of when I looked into it. But my point is that between Trigun, Outlaw Star, and Cowboy Bebop, this definite thing in the air of sci-fi space western. But not sci-fi space westerns in the era of something like Star Wars, although, we'll get to it, Outlaw Star has a Star Wars-iness to it, certainly. More a sci-fi western in the era of something like that show Serenity from a while ago. That has a huge cult following. And actually Serenity has a lot of similarities to Outlaw Star in particular. But my point is that you had these shows that were sci-fi space westerns that followed flawed characters that build up a small but good-sized ensemble cast that they take for about 12 to 24 episodes. Actually, 24 to 26 episodes. I think Trigun's 24 episodes. I'm just, in my head, the original Trigun is 24 episodes. Maybe 26. But, anyway, I think it's actually 24. But, anyway, there's clearly a formula there. It's just about what's your poison. And if you ask people at the time, and you ask people even of my generation, probably most people have seen all three of those shows. But we all have our favorites and our reasons for our favorites. But I think Trigun's a special case for two-ish reasons. I think Trigun's a special case because I think it doing something, and all of these shows are doing something inherently different with their premise and with their characters than each other. But Trigun, in a really unique way, is trying at something different than something like Cowboy Bebop or Trigun is. And the other reason why I want to call Outlaw Star of these three out specifically is because Outlaw Star is the most anime fandom-y, if that makes any sense. And I know it sounds strange, but Cowboy Bebop and Trigun were both not popular in their time. And not popular when they originally aired in Japan. They became popular thanks to American fandom, thanks to international fans who saw them in who saw those shows in fits and starts later on in those shows' lifetimes. I think actually you can trace specifically Cowboy Bebop back to it went on a satellite channel, and that's when it started to blow up overseas. Trigun is obviously a very spaghetti western style of space western. Almost more western than it is even sci-fi on many levels. And so Western fans, American fans, really gravitated to it in a way that Japanese fans didn't completely take to. Because we have a much different relationship with that film narrative and romanticism of the Old West than East Asia does. And does not say that those shows are bad or were bad or the people watching them were misinformed. They just didn't have the same kind of relationship with that stuff. Outlaw Star, on the other hand, it feels like it's at the intersection of a lot of otaku things. Gene is your classic total perv. You've got the boy genius character in Jim Hawking. You have the kind of cat girl character in Aisha. You have the samurai character in Shizuka. You have Kudere slightly character in, in Melfina. Anime was in a very different place in the mid to late 90s than it is now. And you'd see a little bit of an echo of this in something like My Hero, in the female cast members of My Hero. You used to be able to make a show by having a really popular female cast that hit all the right notes. A perfect example of this is Rama 1/2. The main female cast of Rama 1/2 released popular J-pop albums. Multiple, actually. Those voice actresses did that for a couple years there. And Outlaw Star has some of that going on. Unlike both Cowboy Bebop and Trigun, shows where the main characters are jokingly unlikable, Gene Starwind's just a dirtbag. He's fully a dirtbag. From the first time you meet him, he is sexually harassing a waitress. Like, he, in this order, kills a man and then fondles the waitress who he saved. Just in that order. And the show goes out of its way to call him on being a dirtbag, like in the English dub. And I'm sure it's the equivalent that they have in the Japanese dub, because if you don't know, the dub languages are actually approved. Scripts are approved. They're like transliterated and approved somehow. But him calls the main character of this show a dirtbag multiple times in the opening moments of Outlaw Star. First, when he's fondling Iris's butt after he saves her from Death Rob, the 2-bit homicidal maniac guy who he takes down in the bar. And then, later on, the show doesn't even, it's barely going, and Gene is already going to a brothel. That's a very different kind of show than something like the opening of the original Trigun with the big old boomerang guy, or Real Asteroid Blues, the first episode of Cowboy Bebop. It automatically feels less precious and there's this thing that, and I've seen the show multiple times, and the thing that I always forget about Outlaw Star is you don't spend nearly as much time with the characters that you think you do. You don't spend this lackadaisical time constantly with the character, but what they do with it is they give you such high quality levels of it, and they never let up on it, and they do it in between moments that other shows wouldn't show you, so you feel like you've lived with the characters for long enough by the time the story's already going. And there's this scene, and we'll get to this in a second, but there's an unfortunate weirdness with the show's release order and where the episodes slot in, because if you're looking at My Anime list, right, episodes numbering for this show, then there are 3 different entries for Outlaw Star. There's one for the series proper, that's 24 episodes. There's one for the OVA, that's an extra 2, and then there's a third for the remasters that they did a while back. And that's like a 2-minute thing, but throw it in. So there's basically a 2-minute special and 26 episodes. And I say 26 episodes, I'm including the OVAs, because the OVAs take the time to do a thing that the show goes out of its way to do constantly because it knows it doesn't have time to get to otherwise. And that is, the OVAs are just there for pure world building. They're there to give you information about the show's magic system, in the case of the Hot Springs episode, which we'll get to that weird thing. And they're there to give you an idea of some of the technological and resource stuff happening in the background of the show, which is the monster of the ocean planet, OVA, which in the digital version of the show I have, those 2 episodes are just in there, you just watch them, and you're like, oh, these were always here. But when I went to count the show, I was like, why aren't here? What's happening? And I got to the bottom of that when I was watching the Hot Springs episode. Oh, that's right, this specific episode is weird, and we'll get to that in a second. But what Gene being a genuine dirtbag is doing, and what the show being aware of it and not letting him off the hook, and constantly coming back to it, too. As late as episode 23, as late as the Hot Springs episode, he's still a dirtbag. He's still an early 20s weirdo out in space. And I was thinking about this while I was watching Freerun, because I'm watching the latest season of Freerun. And this is one thing that I love about Freerun, is that Freerun lets its characters have genuine flaws that they're working on and working through, and you're allowed to notice that Freerun's not very good at emotions, or Fern is a little dead inside, or Stark is absolute oaf. And they let the character breathe in a way that perfected jewel box of characters, like a Kirito or a lot of the isekai protagonists, actually. They feel contrived. I've talked about this about 9 billion times before. But one of the things that I think is one of the greatest things that Jobless Reincarnation does is it never really redeems Rudius. Rudius is always a work in progress. He's always doing his best. He's always a little to pretty fucked up. He always has personality, I'm going to call them personality scars, of growing up in a flawed way. The reason Rudius is the way he is because he never got a chance to be something more before he died in his previous life. And what you see him doing in his new life is trying to, even if he can't get that, even if that inwardness, even if that inward thing is gone, he can get the outward part. And that becomes his whole universe throughout the course of that story. And that makes it really interesting to watch a character who's so clearly flawed and so clearly doesn't have the perfect ideas about the world or anything really do their best. And I love shows like that. I love shows that don't pretend their main character will ever be perfect. I love shows that don't want you to think their character is the savior. Shows like Naruto, shows like Dragon Ball Z, shows like name your shonen action show here, shonen jump action show here. They're fun, they're power fantasies, they're big, they're bombastic, they're important on some level. But they don't feel real. One of the things I loved about the early parts of Kaiju number 8 is that Kafka has failed. Kafka has fully not achieved what he wanted in life. He's 35 and he believes it will never happen for him. And so much of what makes his character work throughout the show is that he gets a chance to be the thing he wanted to be, to live the dream. And it's all about him making sure that he's not squandering that, doing his absolute best whenever he can, constantly. And that allows the show to excuse a lot of the shonen main character syndrome things that A, happen to him, but B, that he does. Because you, in my case, me as a now 36-year-old, sees in him kind of what I would end up doing. I would probably go for it in the same way. And that vibe is missing from so much of what else is out there in terms of shonen. And to see it so plainly in this, but with a character who's significantly younger, is really impressive. Because they take you to the brothel with Gene, and they show you that he wanted to go out in space and never got to. And throughout the story, you find out, they give you what happened to him, and why he is bound to, I forget the name of the first planet they're on, but why he hasn't gotten himself a ship and gotten himself up and out of there. Other than the fact that once they do get them, once the Outlaw Star is in their possession, it's just an endless array of bills and docking fees and parking tickets, which is kind of perfect and hilarious and part of the world building. And part of what makes this show so incredible, and I've talked about with the 2 OVA episodes, is the world building of the show never quits. They're never done telling you about what the hell is going on in Outlaw Star, what the hell this world is. So much so that eventually Outlaw Star gets a spin-off series called Angel Links, which, from what I can tell, is not as good. I watched a not insignificant part of Angel Links. I also have it. I just haven't finished it. But that follows the Space Patrol forces, a character from the Space Patrol forces in the Outlaw Star universe. But the thing that this show does to tell you about the world is it just straight up looks you straight at the camera and tells you, at the beginning of every episode, the little preference with narration that says, oh, this is what you need to know about this universe, about the world of Outlaw Star, about this, for this episode. And over time, what that does is it adds to your encyclopedia in the back of your head as you're watching things of, oh, They've said the word Munchausen Drive constantly up until the first OVA episode, where the show basically, like, the narration part before the episode starts is straight up just like, hey, yeah, here's what Dragonite is, here's what it does, it enables the Munchausen Drive. You know that word. We've been cramming it down your throat this entire time. Here you go. When I was thinking about how to talk about this show, I thought about the idea of your participation level in media. And what I mean there is, the more participation you have in a form of media, the less accessible it is. So if you think about that, think about this way, right? Television, animation, film, basically anything that's filmed, it's the most accessible. It requires only that you show up and you turn something on, or you sit your butt down and keep your eyes and ears open. That's all it requires of you. Next, directly under that, is video games. Video games have the same qualities as film, but they ask that you directly participate in them to get the story. Under that is comic books and manga. They ask that you literally turn the pages and read the voice lines, but they will bring the imagination and the illustrations and all that stuff. Light novels are weird in between here, but under that is books. Books bring nothing but the words to the page and ask that you use your imagination to fill in all the gaps, create the characters whole cloth in your head, voice everything. They ask all of that of you. But the reward that books get for asking the maximum amount of participation from you, the consumer, they get to do more, because they know you're paying attention. So if you're a show like Outlaw Star that has this impossibly big universe with all of these rules and all of this stuff, and the Hazanko Pirate, and Hazanko and the K Pirates, and Munchausen Drive, and Dragonite, and all of this insane stuff, how do you get people to know the unknowable things there? Well, this isn't the most elegant way to do it, but it's the way they chose to do it, and it works really well. Because what I've said before, by the time they tell you about Dragonite, really tell you about what Dragonite is, you've heard the terms Dragonite and Munchausen Drive thrown around constantly. So instead of feeling like you're just piling more onto you, you have this feeling of, oh, finally, they're going to explain what the hell is going on. I don't know. You might be like, I know what Munchausen syndrome is. What does it mean in this context? I know Dragonite, the Pokemon. What do you mean it's a crystal with infinite energy? And because they do that, because they split the apple, so to speak, I don't know if that's a real thing, but because they don't give you the information before the show and the world is talking about it, you just assume it's technical jargon and you go with it because cool stuff is happening on screen. And then when they need you to know something about it, they're like, oh, hey, here's what Dragonite means. Here's what that is. You've probably been wondering why Aisha keeps bringing it up, what the hell it is. Here's the deal. And then it proceeds to go into a whole episode where Dragonite is a MacGuffin kind of thing. The big shame about Outlaw Star is episode 23. The reason why I'm saying it's a big shame is because episode 23 is a different weird thing. I think it's like 15, 16 or something. Don't quote me, it's the other OVA episode that has to do with the Dragonite thing. Is that episode 23 is a kind of explanation of the magic system of the universe of Outlaw Star. Shoved inside a fan service laden Hot Springs episode that is maximum zany and weird and etchier than almost anything else in the show before or after. But it's still cool as hell. And that's what everybody looks at Cowboy Bebop in hindsight as being this perfect jewel box of a thing. Everybody looks at Trigun as being this paragon about peace and love and all this stuff. And also, nothing in that show actually moves. A fellow animation student in college told me that one time, and it just had never left my skull, and it sucks. Because now I watch that thing, I'm like, nothing in the show really moves. It sucks. It's weird. But the thing about Outlaw Star is that it's world building, and the fact that it allows its character to be shitheads and be flawed and have dimensions to them that are polished away by a lot of other authors and properties. It totally stands in the same arena as something like Cowboy Bebop and Trigun and all of its contemporaries, and even something like Serial Experiments Lain, which is a much different show. I was really surprised when I saw this came out in the same year, because you look at the stylings of Trigun and you look at the stylings of Serial Experiment Lain, and there was just no guidepost on some level, if you didn't want there to be, in terms of what anime looks like at that point. And we're getting back to that a little, but it's still not. There's a punk rockness to Outlaw Star that is not present in stuff now, really. And there's a kind of, and I brought up Serenity here, and one of the big things in common that this and Serenity both have is that both this and Serenity propose the idea that just China wins. That at some point, China wins the cultural everything, which seems very possible right now in particular, and just like, that extends on into the universe in a way that means that major cities out in outer space just look like Hong Kong. Constantly. Haifan looks like Hong Kong. Blue Heaven looks a little like Hong Kong. And the aesthetics of the show on the whole have this very East Asian, but definitely Chinese aesthetic and influence. And right down to like Tau magic and the Tau vision board, the Tau guiding board saying that it's the control interface of the actual ship, the Outlaw Star itself. And everybody just lives inside of it, which is really interesting. I think the show has some definite pacing issues because, and this is a negative I will certainly give it, but it has some definite pacing issues because they want to have the time to build up the main cast. So you meet Gene and Jim, and then Malfina comes into the picture. And then you need some time for Malfina to gel with Gene and establish that connection. And then they introduce Aisha. And Aisha bums around for a little bit, and then Elsa and Aisha are always there. And then they introduce Shizuka, and Shizuka's all of a sudden always there. And that, they take maybe 6 episodes to do all that. They take about a quarter of the show just to get the whole cast in the picture. And then they take another probably quarter of the show to just let the main cast hang out with each other. And all the while they're giving you little pieces of the larger overarching narrative as you go along. And hilariously, they introduce this series of assassins, of 7 assassins they'll have to fight at some point. And one of them, I didn't catch this when I first watched it, but I caught it this time. One of the most menacing ones, they play off as a prop and gag comedy the entire time in the Hot Springs episode. Constantly, this guy who's this very menacing guy with freaking razor claws is just getting his shit caved in constantly on this zany Hot Springs planet. And the pacing I think feels like they wanted to do this in one season, or they knew they had to do this in one season, and they didn't want to sacrifice any of the gains you get from you having an attachment to the characters, because by the time they're going to the Galactic Ley Line and they got around to it, and also, I'll come back to this in a second, but by the time they get around to going to the Galactic Ley Line, you are attached to Shizuka, you're attached to Aisha, you're attached to Malfina, you're attached to Gene, Jim, and even Horace, but Gillian, the actual AI for the ship. You're attached to these characters in a way not very many shows pull off perfectly, or a lot of shows rely on your familiarity with the way anime works to just guide you into it. And if you look at the shows that successfully get you to do that, they usually take a whole lot more time than something like Outlaw Star. And Outlaw Star also is continuously doing this as you're going along through the show, so it never lets up. And the thing about Outlaw Star that is probably the most important is that it never lets up. It is, even in its quieter moments, it feels like it's going a mile a minute. And probably the most jarring that was I think it's like episode, oh god, I forget what episode number it is. Actually look at that. The episode where they introduce the League of Seven Assassins. It's episode 15. In episode 15, they introduce the League of Seven Assassins. And up till episode 15, it's zany antics. And it's like, so episode 15 it is more than halfway through the show. And it's just like zany, funky, weird thing that they're doing constantly. And all of a sudden, the show gets really serious really quickly. All of a sudden, like, Gene truly and honestly believes he's gonna die. And something feels off. It just feels, the whole thing feels off. But you should also remember what the show's premise was supposed to be. They're supposed to go find the galactic ley line. They're supposed to figure out why Melfina exists, what caused her to be essentially a human being in so many words. But Gene very quickly just gets distracted. And the way the show poses it is really smart. Is Gene, Jim, and Melfina and the rest, and Aisha and Shizuka get distracted by being fucking broke. They get distracted by not necessarily that they don't want to go do the thing, but they can't go do the thing and ignore the rest of their lives. Ignore the fact that they have untold amounts of parking tickets. They have repair bills and docking fees and all this other stuff, and just keeping the lights on where they live, which, by the way, is just a makeshift airplane hangar, barely even an apartment. And eventually, the plot comes to find them in a way that feels real and human, in a way that feels like what happens to normal people when they avoid their lives. Their lives come to find them. And eventually that means Gene has to shut up or shut up. Go do the thing. And he does. And the show very early on explored Gene's trauma around going to space, and the fact that, spoilers for this entire show, by the way, if you haven't figured that out by now, that Gene's father died in space. And he's had this hang-up about being in space, character you meet in the very beginning of the show. And over the show, by necessity, he changes as a person and becomes less of a punk wannabe and more of the real thing. And the show is always using this term of authority of outlaws in the show. And very early on in the show, it shows you what the show is saying a real outlaw is, in the form of Hilda, the catalyst for the entire plot. And it says, this is what an outlaw is. Like, this is what they should be like, what they stand for, all this stuff. And a fair amount of the narration sections at the beginning of the show are just about, like, hey, this is what outlaws are, this is what this means, they're descended from pirates and also this other thing, and blah. And then they allow Gene to grow into that character. Not be himself, but be a version of himself that he might actually be proud of. Because the thing about Gene Starwind at the beginning of the show is he's living his life, but he's living his life in the way that it just doesn't. No one would notice that he wasn't. In the very beginning of Outlaw Star, Gene's making good money. He's in business with his best friend. There's no call to adventure for him. But in the in-between moments, when he's sitting on the edge of the bed in the brothel with the girl, there's a sadness to him. And then by the end of the show, that sadness is gone. Like that, he's not a different person, but he's more the person he wants to be. And it's not perfect. And I don't like shows that let their protagonist be absolutely perfect constantly. Because as a human being with an imperfect body, know that can't be true. I just know that can't be true. Even the character Beagle is a little bit too close to that sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I love Cowboy Bebop. I absolutely love Cowboy Bebop. But if you're asking who I want to hang out with, it might be Gene Starwind. You're like, great. You're going to talk about, I'm sure Spike is a great guy to hang out with. I'm thinking a lot of him is probably just, what's his face, the voice actor, Steve Bloom. And I've met Steve Bloom. He's a good dude. But I think I'd have a better time with Gene Starwind. Like, Gene Starwind seems like he's here for a good time and might end up being here for a long time, kind of thing. Just looking to see what the time here is. And that's my thoughts on Outlaw Star. If you're looking for a shonen thing and you've never seen it, I super recommend watching it. I can't tell you where to watch it, if I'm honest, because it was one of those shows that dropped from everything a while ago. You can go find it. In fact, I might recommend you go find it because I'm not sure how the OVAs are treated. And like I said, go looking for the full episode list on my anime list. You're going to have to find 2 entries minimum, 3 if you want the full deal. But 2 entries, one for the actual straight up 24 episodes and another for the 2 OVAs, which I think of as being really and truly necessary to the experience of the show because they explain things about the world on a full episode format that you don't get from just the upfront stuff, from just the upfront narration. The point of the Hot Springs planet is that 3 Tau magic wizards showed up to this planet in search of new and interesting magic, and one of them was this lady who just turned the entire planet into a freaking tourist trap. It's wild. But on that note, that's actually where we're going to leave it. So,
hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.